So, big welcome to Jim Langley, who's here with us this evening. Been fortunate enough to work alongside Jim in, well, both the Alps and Tanzania. And I'm, like I say, a really, really privileged situation to have Jim on the line with us this evening. He's authored a couple of books, and he's a keen conservationist and botanist, and basically all-round guru for anything that's sort of in regards to sort of the foliage and flora fauna of the environment. So, Jim, why don't you tell us a little bit as to how you got into looking at plants, and obviously that'll bring us nicely onto the foraging element of today's.
Yeah, thanks, Si. That's great, and thanks for having me along this evening. And I work in the outdoors. I've taught field studies and ecology and geography in the outdoors since I was in my 20s. So I've got that passion for working with groups in the outdoors and in the natural sense. So I've always erred more on that side, the environmental side of work. And I worked in conservation many years ago as well. So it's for the last 11, 12 years, I've been running my own little business, and basically what my big passion is trying to share a love and a knowledge of the natural world with people. And I've kind of fallen down the route of flowers. What they tell a great story. They never lie. They're always there throughout the year. If you go to look for a special bird or something, then it might be the wrong weather or something. Whereas the flowers, they're really reliable. They are incredibly there's so much information that we've learned from flowers over the years, and also they tell us about the rock types, the soil, the water, and they tell us about how we manage the land as well. So I think as a hook to get people interested in the natural world, trees and flowers were for me a natural teaching point, even though my parents kind of put me off because my mum was an avid gardener and my dad grew veggies, and I got so bored as a kid. But I've later come to love and learn so much more about them and to realize their value. So yeah, it's kind of an interesting journey.
Jim, thanks very much. I mean, I think it's, when we had a chat a little bit about this before we even set up the call, I think it was just fascinating, some of the stuff that you talked about, and it wasn't. And what we want to talk about this evening, springtime foraging, but it's not just about, eating plants either. It's all their many, many uses. And I think that's what's fascinating. And it's almost like it's a bit of a lost skill over time. And I think a lot of people that probably join us this evening have some interest in running. And as people may know, that Run the Wild is all about running in the wild. And I think this is what we wanted to do, was address that balance of bringing more information about the wild. And we had a great run the other weekend on Bluebell, and we were looking at different plants on that. This time of year when all those plants are like just coming out of the ground, out of the mud that we've been sort of having an awful lot of, and what a winter that was. So I think, what sort of plants are we likely to see? Like I say, got a lot of trail runners probably in the room. What sort of plants are we likely to see in that sort of environment that we're running past at the moment?
Yeah, so I take it you're running through woodlands, you're running through field systems, agricultural field. You've got field boundaries, you've got hedgerows. I mean, Britain's got a phenomenally diverse mosaic of habitats that we've created over, thousands of years of land management. So, you'll be, this time of year is perfect. End of April into May, all the flowers are starting to turn from their green foliage, and their flowers are popping out. So one of the first ones you probably noticed in your runs would be the lovely yellow flowers of the primrose. So the primrose, its name tells you it's the prime or the first rose, and it's one of the first woodland flowers you will have run past. So there's a lot that you can gain from just a name, but they are a rose. And just like the roses in your garden, the cultivated ones, you've got wild strawberries that you'll be running through at the moment. They'll be into flower, but they're so small, you need to go look really closely. Whereas like you've got fields of bluebells, or you've got If you go down some damp areas of woodland, then you may they smell the wild garlic. The flowers are coming out now. I don't know exactly where you are. I'm up in North Wales. So the flowers are just appearing now on bluebells and on the ramsons, wild garlic. Where you are, you're probably 3 weeks, 4 weeks ahead of us, maybe.
Yeah, I'd say that's the case, actually. Yeah, because we've just. I think things are a little bit late this year. Like they're probably a couple of weeks later, but than they were last year, for example. You keep getting these frosts and so on, but I think bluebell's probably going to be at their best in just a few days' time.
Oh, fantastic! And as well, you've got in the hedgerows, you've got the white flowers of the blackthorn, and May Day is on Saturday, and the May blossom is the hawthorn.
Right.
And so you'll be smelling the hawthorn as you're running past them. Main difference between the two, they've both got thorns, but the blackthorn, you'll see the flowers and then the leaves appear, whereas the hawthorn, the leaves are out and then the flowers appear afterwards.
Right.
So if you're not sure which it is, and the leaves of hawthorn are lovely. This time of year, really young, fresh leaves. The best eating foraging is with the young, fresh leaves. So if you were to pick a handful of hawthorn leaves, put them in a salad, they've got a kind of nutty flavour, but they're not strong. They're lovely, good addition to a salad. And
so we like these sort of things, and we're going to get a little bit more into that, the sort of the different kind of plants that we can perhaps look at eating or what have you. Is that something that people would have had knowledge of that, going back a certain number of years? Is it something that we've lost, or is it something that it's still been only people who in the know kind of thing?
I mean, people and civilizations have relied on plants since their medicinal use as well, way back to Chinese scriptures and Egyptian hieroglyphs. So, knowledge of flowers and their uses is an old, well-developed kind of study, really, in many ways. And our dependence on flowers is really fundamental, from food to, clothing and resources. So the way we live our lives, we've kind of losing and have lost a lot of that knowledge in some ways, but the information's still out there, and the sources, and even if you just take a plant's name, then you can gain a lot from the common name, but you can also gain a lot from its Latin name. So, and they can tell you maybe some of its ancient uses or what they may have been used for, or and there was something way back centuries ago called the Doctrine of Signatures. Okay. So a plant looked like something, and it was a signature given by God. So there was, the doctrine was, well, if this plant looks like the liver, like the pennywort, for instance, if you have the wall pennywort, it looks like a little round belly button. And right. So it was used to treat stomach problems, stomach disorders. Mm. And it's part of its Latin name is umbilicalis as well. So you've actually got the Latin link of the appearance, but the link between what it looked like, that signature, was from God. It's not good science at all, and there aren't really any links with that. Eyebright, the name Eyebright, you'll see that in the tiny little white flower that you see in the grasslands, does dilate the pupils, and you can buy, and the name Euphrasia means euphoric, and so it makes you gladden and heighten. So even within the name and the actual common name, but you can buy Euphrasia eye drops.
That's really interesting. Am I right? Am I right? I remember this from my IML. I might be completely wrong, so I'm going to myself. But is wort? If you've got wort in a name, does that mean it's sort of had a use of some sort? Is that correct, or am I wrong?
Yeah, I think it dates back to about its Old German wort. I think that's where the root of it comes from. It's 6th century or something. It's an old word, and it has some medicinal property or useful property. So milkwort is a common grassland plant, and that's meant to stimulate milk production in cows. Other things I've read that it helps with mastitis in cattle as well. So it's certainly got something to do with milk production. And the Latin name of it is polygala, and poly is many, and gala comes from galaxy or the Milky Way. It's that whole concept of that. I think it's an old Greek word, but galak. and milk. So yeah, there's definitely some links with that, and farmers would probably know a lot more about that.
I suppose that's the thing, isn't it? Because, you know, these words still exist in our language. Obviously, one thing is identifying what that plant is, so even finding out what the word that sits behind what you're seeing there. But actually, then there's this whole backstory. It's not just a case of maybe, you know, historical uses, but, you know, there's lots of different things within the historical aspects within the language, within the culture that's using it, and things like that. So I suppose, you know, and someone's put on there, guys, if you've got any questions, please put them in the chat. Like I say, we're really fortunate to have Jim along this evening. I'm really pleased that everyone managed to make it through the technical issue that we have with Facebook. But yeah, pop your questions up there. And, you know, things like wild garlic, we saw a lot of that on our Bluebell 13K run. And we've also got, Karen mentioned something there about dandelion flowers. So let's just maybe a little thing about, if you can explain what sort of plants would we likely see at this time of year. Obviously we're down in the Chilterns, so things are perhaps a little bit more advanced than North Snowdon, but and what are the easy things to identify that are going to be fairly safe, let's say?
Well, in terms of foraging, Chilterns, so you've got chalky grasslands and lime-rich areas. So, I mean, you've got phenomenal diversity where you live. It's incredible. We have small pockets of calcium-rich grasslands up in the mountains here, and that's where I find loads of diversity. So, yeah, you're very blessed where you are.
Yeah.
we can simple things like nettle. We can all identify a nettle. You can't confuse it with anything. You'll get stung. There are flowers that look like it, but it's the sting that we get from that. So they're really common. You'll find those where, as you're running, you'll find less of them in the woodland. But as you get closer to a village or a house, an old house, and as you run past old farmhouses or some old ruins, you'll see more nettles as you run there, because they love food and nitrogen especially. So around habitation or around farms, you'll get more nettles that disturb ground. So you'll run through banks of nettles. So there, as you mentioned, you've got the groups that you've got like dandelions. Dandelions are really difficult to identify. They have lots of microspecies, lots of plants look similar, but the classic dandelion is the whole plant is edible. So now when the flowers are closed, it's the best to pick the flowers, not when they're open. When they're open, they're really strong flavor, but when they're closed, they're really good to add on the salad, as are the leaves as well. And the roots, you can, in the autumn, if you could uproot the plant, we'll talk about legalities and uprooting plants in a minute, but you can roast the root, grind it and make a coffee from it. It's a gorgeous coffee. So the whole of the plant of the dandelion is edible. I know we're talking two common flowers there, but it's easier to spot those. And the dandelion, the name comes from the dent de lion. So it's the leaves that have the lion's teeth. It's a diuretic, so it'll make you wet the bed, or in French, pissenlit. So yeah,
don't eat too much.
Yeah.
Well,
I mean, there's a couple there, and then another one that's also medicinal but not edible is the daisy, and daisies are everywhere. Interesting fact that you've got very common plants. Nettles are so nutritious. They're great for the heart. They're great for circulation. They're great for iron. You can make a really nice tonic with a bottle of red wine and nettles and some unsulfured apricots, and then you can steep that, and you can just have you'd have to go through a recipe and a procedure, but then essentially you could strain the nettles after a month, and then you've got like a nettle iron-rich tonic that you've got for the cost of a bottle of wine and a few nettles. So, but then the daisy isn't an edible plant, but it's really useful and it's really overlooked. As a runner, niggles, sprains and strains and calf muscles.
Oh, tell me that.
Yeah, you may go for a bottle of Voltarol, or you may, or you may get a tube of arnica cream. But you can make daisy into arnica. Essentially, daisy and arnica are in the same family, and you could get a whole big handful of the flowers, dried flowers, put them in olive oil and melt them down in beeswax after a couple of weeks of them steeping. And that's as effective with bruising and sprains as arnica is.
That's amazing. And what I quite like about that as well is those plants, they're prolific, aren't they? You know, and if people are fortunate enough to have a garden, there's probably a good chance that they're there as well. So they don't even need to kind of leave, you know, kind of their own house almost.
Exactly. And you know, if you're getting into foraging or want to start looking at what you can eat, what you could forage or how, and some of the ones which are really common are the ones that we overlook, and yet they've got the greatest kind of inroad into the, you know, into that route if you want to go down that route. So yeah,
that's really interesting. And so, I mean, that sort of location is a key thing, isn't it? I mean, if we're starting foraging, be it for, you know, medical purposes or eating, then, you know, where should we go? Are there places we should avoid? You know, I don't know, are there certain habitats that are good to go to? What's the scoop there?
Yeah, no, I mean, every habitat's got its own kind of resource for edible foods and plants and things. So and some are more diverse but I guess there's, around foraging and collecting wild food, there's etiquette, as there always is, what we should do, what we shouldn't do, what we're allowed to do, and what's against the law. So identification, I suppose, if you look at the principles in foraging, you have to be good at identification. That's really important. You pick things that you're going to just consume for yourself. So, you know, if you've got a field of dandelion, then taking one or two is going to be fine. But if there's only one dandelion in that field, picking it isn't really the right thing to do. So, you know, pick things that are in abundance, pick things that you can identify. Also, if you take a pair of scissors and cut the leaves off rather than rip the plant, that's always a much better approach as well. And also, if by law, there's wildlife law from the 80s, you're not allowed to uproot a plant. So you can take the part that you'd like from it, but to uproot a plant, it's against the law unless you have the landowner's permission. Okay. So that's been in place for 40 odd years.
Okay. So that's, I suppose that's interesting, isn't it? So if we see wild garlic, and I'm using that in broad terms, but then perhaps taking some leaves, you know, it's fine. But if you would start pulling the whole thing out, then yeah, you're getting into dodgy territory with the landowner.
You are. I mean, the likelihood of anything coming of that. But the great thing about wild garlic is where it grows, there's lots of it.
Yes.
It likes wet woodlands, it likes calcium, so it's base rich in terms of the soil chemistry, fertile soils, damp soils, and you get banks of it.
Yeah.
It makes it really easy to identify. The smell of garlic is, I wouldn't eat the leaves when they start, you know, picking the leaves as well. When the flowers appear, like now, you'll find that the leaves have gone kind of yellowy.
Yeah.
And they start to turn. So it's best not to have the leaves until when the flowers have come out. Okay. So you pick them before, just because they don't taste as good, they're a bit tough. And so picking young, fresh leaves, always way. But then the flower heads, you could pick the flower head and boil up some potatoes, bit of butter, and sprinkle them on, just like you would like with you could get chive flowers, the blue ones,
right?
Sprinkle them on, but you could do the same with ransons.
That sounds great. Make me hungry already. Some good points coming up here, like people sort of talking about, you know, foraging where there's maybe they've got chased by cows because that was an inadvertent hazard that they hadn't perhaps thought of. And the other thing as well, so, you know, picking next to roadsides or even, next to footpaths, perhaps where dogs are weed on stuff. You know, I suppose those are, you know, but what about roadsides? Is that a hazard? I mean, are there going to be, you know, sort of toxins that have come from, you know, I've seen people picking blackberries, for example, on the roadside. Is that a good thing to do? Or
yeah, there's obviously road runoff. So yeah, where you obviously want to pick food which is clean and not polluted. So if farmers have been spraying fields, then you might not want to pick, foods from the hedgerow which are adjacent to those fields. So you might have livestock fields that may be better to pick from than, say, a sprayed crop field and the hedgerow around that. Road runoff, definitely, it's a consideration. Thoroughly wash the plants if it's dog fouling or cow pats and all sorts of effluents and things like that. So just consider the environment that you're collecting and gathering in, and would you be prepared to eat something that's down on a verge, or brambles? Yeah, they're up high, so a couple of meters up, they're cleaner than they are if they were down on the ground. So just a consideration, really. But yeah, you don't really want to get polluted sites if you can help it.
That makes sense. And the other thing we had our group look at as well on the weekend just gone was beech leaves, which
yes,
which obviously is one of those things. And you were talking about how fresh leaves are very different, or the timing of the plant. So identifying them is one thing, which you've got to be obviously super certain about, because if you get that wrong, could be potentially even ultimately death. But then there's also a timing element, isn't there? And I know, like, beech leaves, when you pick them fresh, they're like amazing, sort of green apple taste. And but then if you pick them halfway through summer, it's like chewing down on wood.
Yeah.
So I suppose that's kind of, there are probably quite a few plants like that, aren't there, where the timing is
definitely. Young and fresh leaves are always the best. Also pick on dry days, not wet days, because if you're going to eat it there on the day, it's fine. But if you're going to preserve, because a lot of foods that you might harvest, you might want to preserve. So there's lots of ways of preserving, like making jellies or syrups or pickling and putting into oils as well, or jellies and jams. So there's lots of ways of preserving. So you want to make sure that is dry and fresh and young. Beech leaves, when you mention beech leaves, I've done one thing with beech leaves, and it's made this, it sounds like a Japanese name, but it's alcoholic. It's a beech leaf noi, and it's delicious. So you'll harvest bags of these. You just get 2 carrier bags full of leaves. It's incredible how many leaves, and you need to squish them down into a big jar, kiln jar. You pour in a bottle of gin and leave it for a couple of weeks, and the gin turns this copper color. Then you strain the leaves, you add some sugared water, so you boil up some water, sugar it, and then you add a bit of brandy. I forget the exact quantities. Leave it till the winter, and it's the most beautiful Christmas spiced drink. And it's all because of the beech, as you said, that all the goodness comes out of the leaves, but only when they're young and fresh.
That's interesting. I don't know. We've got a couple of people that put in there, and Severine as one of our regulars to Run the Wild, and she said, I think that the Noyu means stone of a fruit. I don't know whether. There we go.
Okay.
And there's some other questions just popping out. I'm going to pop the questions in as well. We've we're going to have a chat through things. But what about things like if you're walking past an apple tree, or if there's fallen fruit on the ground, is there any? Are you aware of any kind of rules around that? Are you allowed to pick up fallen fruit even if it's on, as a public footpath, often passed across private land? Is that free game if it's on the ground? What's the scoop there? Do you know?
I don't know about that, but that's.
I know when we've been to Tanzania, there's a rule, isn't it, that if you go, you can eat. It's not stealing if you eat what you can there present in the field. So, for example, if you this is at Tanzania, so obviously we're not there. So it's a little bit, it's kind of like a tangent. But if you go to a mango farmer, for example, and you walk through the mango plantation, you can eat as many mangoes as you like, but you're not allowed to take any away with you.
Oh, right.
The idea is that
that's interesting.
Eat present. So I don't know. Maybe there's something similar in the UK.
I don't know. Again, it's landowner's permission.
Yes.
But you're not uprooting, so you can for personal consumption. So if an apple's fallen, like crab apples are wild, aren't they? Or damsons and I've never heard of people getting, called out or arrested for picking, wild damsons, or black sloes.
No.
So no, I don't know. I would just make sure that there's no worm in it.
Yes. Yeah. Good point.
Or half a worm if you've eaten it.
I suppose, you know, a lot of the thing that, you know, we want to emphasize in, you know, this talk, it's quite a brief talk really, because it's a huge topic.
Oh yeah.
But is that we're, you know, we want it to be in a considered way. The first, obviously, that are you allowed to do it? Is it good for the environment? So, you know, thinking about the, you know, the kind of the amount of the ampleness of what's there already. Are you taking away a significant percentage? And then obviously your own safety and identifying it. I think that's, you know, that's obviously another important part. In regards to sort of foraging, are there anything that you particularly think is a really good plant that people should be keeping an eye out for, that they can maybe add into recipes over the season? Any favorites?
Yeah, there's now wild garlic is kind of on, it's turned in a way, it's past the season. You've got Jack by the Hedge, which is garlic mustard. If you know to identify it, it can grow in big, you know, clumps in hedgerows, really common, gorgeous, you know, kind of like a fiery, slightly more fiery than the wild garlic. But you could substitute that. You can make with some, you know, almonds, a bit of olive oil, cheese, and with Jack by the Hedge, with a bunch of leaves from that, you can make yourself a little gorgeous pesto, you know. So yeah. there's lots of things that you can substitute into a recipe that you might have put basil leaves in, but then, well, why not put something from the hedgerow in?
That's a really good idea. I love that. You know, it's using plants as well. Like Jack by the Hedge, you know, yeah, you see it if you're driving down a country lane, you just see it everywhere, don't you? With this,
yeah,
it's just coming in. I saw some the other day actually. So
4 white petals, that's a key. So lots of flowers have 5 petals, but the Jack by the Hedge is one with 4, and 4 petals. There's the cabbage family have 4 petals basically, and it's one of the members of that family. And so anything that comes from, not anything that comes, you know, but the bitter cresses and the mustards and things, it's an edible family, a bit like the rose family is. There's a lot of edible, like pears and apples and damsons and, you know, sloes, you know, rowan, they're all, and strawberries, they're all the rose family. So it's quite a good family to eat from, but you wouldn't go and eat a buttercup or anything for the buttercup family, because they have very strong active compounds. So again, some families have these active compounds and others don't. So yeah, something like Jack by the Hedge is a good one, but it's the identification, and it's basically linking back to a family, like the mint family, you know, aromatics, and you've got the beautiful thyme, or the, you know, and the mints themselves, peppermints. You can pick some wild mint and things like that. So, you know,
and I suppose that's the thing, isn't it? You know, if you can, those sort of prolific things are great. I think the recipes of some people sort of asking about us doing a foraging trip, and we are going to have a little chat about that, aren't we, Jim?
Love it.
Yeah,
yeah.
I think it's what is really important for people, I think, is to learn about the environment, and by learning about the environment, they're more likely to protect it and respect it. So I think it's a skill that we all need to kind of get back to. And the other thing as well, I suppose, is, you know, you've written a couple of books. You also have some cards for identifying plants. Could you talk a little bit about those? So sort of some.
Very happily I could do. Yeah, I just have to open this up. I've closed the screen so I can't see myself. I've written one book. I've co-authored a book. I've not written many, but I've written resources that have been published. But so those of you interested in the Alps, there's a book I've written with a geologist, and we explain the natural history of the Alps from geology and flowers. And there's 20 walks across the Alps, different lengths and different, you know, different lengths and durations as well. So that came out just over a year ago, and that's been really popular. And then, as Simon said, because I teach in the outdoors, I try and engage people as much as I can when I'm out working, and so I get people involved with their learning journey. You know, instead of listening to me yabber on for hours about everything, I try and engage people with activity, and that's developed into a series of, I'll just show you now, a series of products, which I've got playing cards and trump cards. And so, for instance, I've got a card here. Here's a lovely woodland flower. That's very edible. The wood sorrel. So each card is based with some information, some identification, but also a little fact at the bottom. So this edible plant, it's got a sharp and sour taste, and the leaves contain oxalic acid, which gives it that sharpness. So you might have come across that one in the woodlands, and that's another good edible one. So, you know, that's the style of cards that I've got, and I think
great way to learn. And
that one, I don't know if you can see that, that's Meadow Sweet. So these are the trump style cards. Again, just a bit of fun learning way, but again with facts. And Meadow Sweet, you'll find lots of that where you are, because it loves calcium, it likes damp ground, but you'll smell it. It's a beautiful smell in the summer. You can make syrups from it, and actually, as a runner, you get a bit of pain. The old name for Meadow Sweet is spirea, which is where the name aspirin comes from. So they actually took aspirin out of the meadow. They extracted it about 120, 140 years ago, before they took it from willow. So they isolated it in Meadow Sweet. So you could just hang a plant of Meadow Sweet upside down, put it in a brown bag, so any of the leaves and things that fall out. And then when the leaves are dry, you could make a nice tea from it. So it would give you pain relief after your run with Sai.
I mean, I love that about these plants. You know, it's sort of, I think there's a lot of, you know, modern medicine, isn't there? Which is, it's kind of, that's where it's come from. You know, it's
herbal medicine. And I mean, there are professionals that you know, look at the therapeutic nature of the flowers, herbalists, and they study for years. So it's yeah, there is a science behind it, and but to learn a lot about those, I mean, I've been out with herbalists and I've come up with some recipes based, you know, on my experiences with them. But yeah, plants have a pharmacological effect on the body. So we talk about therapeutic plants, and we talk, you know, it's you know, the caffeine is a natural plant compound. So is nicotine, but they come from a family, the ones with the I-N-E at the end, and strychnine is within that group, and so is quinine, and so is atropine, deadly nightshade. So some of these are such powerful effects on the body that they're considered poisonous, whereas others are stimulants. And valerian, you might go into a shop and buy valerian tea, and that contains a natural sedative, which is why you drink it at night. But again, it's one of those compounds, those alkaloid compounds. So knowing about that is one thing, and learning about that is one thing, but just foraging and knowing what you're eating and why you should eat something and why you shouldn't just try something.
Yes. Yeah, that makes sense. I sort of, I don't know about you, but and I'm going to ask you this, but yeah, I mean, do you have any kind of funny foraging stories, or, you know, kind of those moments where you go, that was close?
I've misidentified things.
Yeah.
But I tend not to eat things that I'm not sure about. So I don't know about funny stories.
That's a good rule of life, I think, generally.
But yeah, no, I'll try things, and you know, I've got a rule of, you know, if I'm not sure about something, it's a traditional method is just to put a little bit on your lips and wait a day and see if there's any reaction.
Right.
Before you put it in your mouth, and then you might put the next day just put it on the tip of your tongue. Yeah. Take it away, see if there's any effect. Yeah. And then the third day you might chew it a little bit. But again, you're not ingesting it, but you're building up this, is it a good thing to have, or is it not a good thing to have?
So yeah, okay. So you're taking it steady, not all in or nothing. Yeah, I know when I was over in Sweden a couple of years ago. Yeah, because last year didn't happen, did it?
You skip a year.
That's right. We were picking some chanterelles,
Right.
And there are two very similar. And this one's a perfect example. It's like it looks a bit too perfect, and it was it was kind of like the deadly version as opposed to the one is nice to eat. And I suppose that's why we've not really talked about fungus this evening at all, other than in that little anecdote, because it's even real experts have fallen foul. And I know there are, I think, you can be, if you're uncertain, I think it's always a good idea not to eat, but fungus is a whole nother level of yeah.
It is. Yeah. No, I kind of tend to avoid them for that respect, because it's so much to learn, and you only have a small window really of when you can forage, and it's mainly in the autumn. Right. Not only in the autumn, because there are bracket fungi on the trees, all year round. So, and but and a whole nother world.
Well, I think it's been really interesting, and I think obviously this is a huge topic, and what we'll probably do is I think we're going to poll people to see whether we can get you down here to the Chilterns and do a bit of a foraging run, walk, or something like that, because I think it's a fascinating topic, and I think people love finding things that either they can eat or has a use. And you've already picked up quite a few uses for runners particularly. And so thank you very much. Is there any way that, people can find out more about what you do, like your website, things like that?
Yeah, I have a little business called, it's a kind of environmental training. I run workshops mainly in North Wales because it's where I live, but if you're interested in coming out into the mountains and learning about the woodlands and things and the mountains themselves, or walking in the mountains, then that's my background really. But yeah, I operate a little company called Nature's Work. Okay. I can put a link into the chat after this.
Yeah.
So I do sell products as well.
So those cards, if people want to buy the cards, because I think they're great, or those sort of things, they can buy them from your website.
That's right. And I've just written an article actually for a magazine. I call it Speed Botany. So actually that might be a good little hook. If I come down, we could do a Speed Botany event.
That sounds really good. Yeah, I'm looking forward to that already. Yeah, I think it's fascinating. Jim, thank you so much for your time this evening. I really appreciate it, and looking forward to getting out in the mountains as well at some point in the future. And thank you everyone for joining us this evening. I'm really sorry about the technical aspect of Facebook. The problem is probably more mine than Facebook, I suspect. But we've recorded this. We'll be going to be putting it up as well on the Facebook page, and have a great week and stay safe, and we'll hopefully see everyone soon.